Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are here for the second match of today's stream. This is, of course, the Victory Road World Cup of VGC, sponsored by Elgato. My name is Ben Kiraku, joined here by Maeve O'Rourke. Maeve, how did you enjoy that last match?
The last match was great. It was still super interesting. It's one of those matches where the adjustments from game one to game two are very obvious, but the adjustments from game two to game three are full of mind games. So
Mm.
I thought both the players played extremely well. I thought it was really interesting to see, especially in a group that has so many, has so much at stake with both of their eliminations. And I did say before we went to break the incorrect match that we will be showing here for the second match today. I do want to just correct it. It is Panama and Italy. So Panama and Italy are going to be a really nice match for the two of us today, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. And a slightly lower stakes on this match than the previous one because Italy are already guaranteed the first seed within their group. They're going through to the playoffs, the next stage of the tournament. And unfortunately, Panama have not done enough so far to make it through. But, a little bit of a match where Italy can just relax a little bit and try some things out, maybe do a little bit of play testing for teams that maybe they weren't so confident to bring before, scout out a little bit more of the competition and how these teams face up in live events. And of course, Panama, I'm sure, want to represent their country, go out with a bang, especially when you're facing down someone like Italy. It's always a great idea to try your best because they are definitely one of the favourites for this tournament, having come out of Victory Road's previous Euro Cup tournament victorious. So, yeah, definitely a good opportunity for the players from Panama to battle it out against some really top opponents. You can see here on your screen, though, unfortunately for Panama, Italy are leading the charge 4-1.
Yeah, and this is a point, like you said, where the teams get to have a little bit more fun with their team building, especially. This is the point where you call in consultant Jamie Boyd to build you a really interesting team. I love with Panama that they're still fighting, they're still bringing in some really interesting Pokemon, a couple Zacians, a Groudon, which is really nice. Zapdos is something I'm seeing a Porygon too as well. So,
Mm.
some really interesting Pokemon here. Italy also, they could be working on some great stuff. Flavio brought a Lunala, which is a Pokemon that hasn't seen a ton of use here, but it is one of those Pokemon that can run both Trick Room or Tailwind, and oftentimes is running Trick Room right now. So Italy has has had a really incredible run. A they will be facing a group 3 team in top 16 as well. So that's going to be interesting to see exactly what teams they could possibly be looking to play in that next playoff round. Both of our players, though, I'm really excited to see what we've seen. I know you guys probably saw a little bit in that preview before the announcement started and our match started that there is a couple of interesting Pokemon on one of those teams.
Yeah, there definitely is. But if you missed the preview, we're going to go into player profiles right now and see what these players are running because Felipe Molino is running a fantastic looking team. That is the Xerneas Indeedee female version, the Ninetales, which I haven't seen in VGC for a very long time now, Drifblim, Venusaur, and that Azumarill. So you've got this sort of combination of Venusaur with automatic speed control. If that Ninetales is able to get up its drought ability, get into the sun, you've got Drifblim with its unburden ability and likely holding that psychic seed, so we'll be able to again go fast. And it's quite an interesting adaptation when you're playing a Xerneas matchup. That Xerneas's biggest problem is Pokemon like Zacian, especially, but any other steel type tends to do fairly well against Xerneas. And the adaptation to how you beat that is normally you go, well, I'll play Incineroar, maybe I'll play Entei, maybe I'll play some Torkoal, maybe I'll play all three in the same team, and launch in as much fire pressure as you got. But this team says, hang on a second, we'll just go for Ninetales. That's going to enable some other speed control, maybe a Weather Ball on Venusaur. As well as be able to get the tailwind up with Drifblim and say, do you know what? I'm going to be faster than you, and I can pile on my own pressure with that Ninetales. So a really interesting adaptation for Felipe, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this pans out for him.
Yeah, and one thing with Azumarill too, you've got Belly Drum, which is such a crazy move because it gets out Azumarill so strong. But then also Sap Sipper is a really great ability right now because you have so many strong grass types in the field, especially with Rillaboom and Serena, are two that we're seeing a lot right now. So Felipe's opponent has a lot to work out with the Pokemon that he is bringing in response. He is bringing that Calyrex, Shadow Rider, Incineroar, Regieleki, Rillaboom. Nihiligo, and Urshifu. So again, that Azumarill could be really strong against, if it gets up to that +6, could be really strong against any of these Pokemon if it's able to fire off attacks, and it is not going to worry about that Rillaboom if it does come to this match.
No, not at all. And coming off a top 8 position in the Victory Road Winter Qualifier, number 4 this year is a good place to be. And of course, with the support of Team Italy, you'd like to think that there's a good amount of team building props that are going into both Emanuele's team and the rest of Team Italy, being able to both build the solid team, optimize it as well as you can, but of course then know how to play it and have those really strong players that you can go up against that punish you for all of your mistakes. And that's really one of the ways that players, certainly in VGC, tend to improve the most, when they've got players that can constantly challenge them and they have to make the right calls and make the right moves and just work out how to play the game better. This team may not have to deal with as many of the tricks that is on the other side of the field, because you've got that Nihiligo, which will be able to hit the Azumarill where the Rillaboom wouldn't. You've got the also the ability to hit the Ninetales there and the Drifblim, so could be quite important. Calyrex Shadow, depending on how the Drifblim is changed, may not be able to knock it out in one. So likely Emanuele's going to have to play against some form of Tailwind here, some form of speed control, but we'll have to see going into the matches. We move straight on into team preview for game 1.
Yeah, and again, like you said, there are a lot of really interesting things, and this is one thing that really shows how good of a Pokemon player you are. If you can look at a funky team like this and remember, oh, I haven't seen Ninetales in a couple years, but this is what it once did, and this is what it can do, and here's an item it may be running. So it's all of that mental knowledge that these players can accumulate over their years and years of playing. Especially, when you have that experience of looking back and saying, oh, I remember that this thing did this once a long time ago, or, oh, I remember in 2016 Azumarill was really big at some point, and it was, and it's a lot of mental games, and that's, one thing that really helps players, especially by looking back at older formats, especially for team building, because you get some really interesting stuff like this, and this is a time when Panama can go a little bit buck wild, I think, with their team building. So some really interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're seeing here. But I think there's definitely a method to the madness, let's say. And looking behind the lines, we've got that Ninetales holding a choice scarf, which I've personally never seen in many years of playing VGC. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects the matchup. Of course, Ninetales being faster than probably the Calyrex Shadow Rider on Italy's side, Emanuele's side of the field, it's going to be really quite game-changing potentially, and especially if it can get that hit off before a Nihiligo knocks it out. That is, if it comes to the game, of course. So you've got some interesting item choices as well as interesting move slot choices, and of course, behind all of the scenes with all of those choices on Drifblim and Ninetales and Azumarill, the Pokemon that you don't see too often, you have got that Xerneas there, and certainly with a Calyrex Shadow Rider team, if you're going to be letting the Xerneas get its Geomancy up, you're going to be having a really hard time, especially since Emanuele doesn't have too many options for speed control outside that Regieleki.
Yeah, but here we go with that turn 1 of game 1 between these two players. We're going to see the Regieleki and the Calyrex here for the opening side over there for that Regieleki to be shiny and come in, but the Indeedee and Drifblim here. So we saw that Drifblim was holding that Psychic Seed, so that is going to be really nice here, but we do also see that speed tier of Calyrex will be going faster than any of the Pokemon here, especially that Indeedee, who is typically nice and slow, gets that Psychic Surge up though, and will allow this Drifblim to eat its Psychic Seed, who is going to get that boost from that terrain and that item.
Yeah, so Unburden now making the Drifblim the fastest Pokemon in the field. That means that the Tailwind is likely to go up first. This indeed could be carrying Shadow Ball, maybe. Could be a nice little tech move on Indeedee, which we've seen a little bit to knock out Calyrex Shadow Riders in one. Of course, you don't need too much power when your moves are 4 times effective, and that's going to have to balance between the Regieleki going for things like Electro Web, maybe the Tailwind going up, and whether or not Expanding Force comes out from Felipe's side of the field, and that's going to do a fair amount of damage to anything that Emanuele wants to potentially switch in here. So a little bit of a cross purposes here as to what happens turn one, but I think it's going to be very important going forward for the rest of the match.
Yeah, Calyrex uses Protect, though. Not going to want to take any damage. And Didi also goes for a Protect here, possibly not wanting to get slowed down, but this Drifbloom actually gets that Volt Switch from the very beginning from that Regieleki. So that Regieleki is also going to switch out here, not comfortable in that opening position for Emanuele. So Emanuele going to be bringing in here another Pokemon in the back that may be better capable to attack either of these two Pokemon. And this Drifloom, if it does get this Tailwind up towards the end here, it's going to be interesting to see. The Rillaboom instead comes in. So now we know that Emanuele brought that Rillaboom, especially if Felipe has that Azumarill in the back. But most importantly, it's changing this terrain here for this Indeedee, especially if it wanted to go for something like an Expanding Force. And so now we see this Drifloom actually goes for a Destiny Bond onto the Calyrex slot here. So that's really interesting to see exactly what's going to happen here.
Yeah, now you've got this position where, I mean, Destiny Bond will probably wear off before anything else happens. I mean, it's in effect until the next time that Drifblim makes a move, and because of that unburden boost, it's likely that Drifblim will make a move before the Calyrex. But with the Rillaboom switching in, it's not going to offer too much pressure to the Drifblim, and Drifblim could be satisfied to go for the Tailwind maybe, or go for a Shadow Ball straight into that Calyrex just because it has already protected. And so you've got this toss-up if you're Emanuele, whether you protect the Calyrex by switching it out, or whether you predict the Tailwind, go for an attack and try to fake out maybe the Indeedee just to give yourself a little bit more breathing room. But no attacks here, just a switch out from the Calyrex.
Yeah, Nihilego comes in. That is the last Pokemon that Emanuele had of the 4 that he brought. So now we already see them all by turn 3. Drifblim goes for the Tailwind here. Gonna boost the speed of the Pokemon on his side of the field. And Didi goes for that Expanding Force. Will only be single target because of that grassy terrain. Hits that Rillaboom for a small amount of damage. And Rillaboom goes for the U-turn here into the Indeedee. And that does so much damage. That super effective attack gets that Indeedee down. It was a critical hit, which makes a lot more sense because I was a little concerned as to what that Rillaboom was holding. But now this Indeedee is not looking nearly as healthy as it wants to be.
No, certainly not. And, you know, the critical hit on Indeedee may matter, it may not. I mean, it could be that the Calyrex from Emanuele's side of the field may be able to pick it off with something like a Psyshock in subsequent turns because of that extra damage. But whether or not that really matters will really depend on the other Pokemon that are facing it down. And, of course, now with the Tailwind up, Regieleki or Nihilego or Calyrex all have to be a little bit concerned about targeting into the Drifblim now, and that's going to maybe cause some issues for Emanuele's targeting, because you know you want to be taking knockouts, you want to be protecting yourself through the Tailwind, of course. But if that Drifblim doesn't decide to go on the offensive and does decide to go for that Destiny Bond, any Pokemon that knocks it out will be knocked out in turn, and that's going to be really difficult. It could knock out one of Emanuele's most important pieces. Say that Nihilego for being able to deal with the Ninetales and the Xerneas potentially in the back for Felipe, or knocking out that Calyrex so that the it can't just pressure big damage onto, again, the Xerneas or the Azumarill. So lots of mind games going on here, but I'm really liking how Felipe is positioning himself, making sure that he gets the Tailwind in the right place and puts on that pressure with things like the Destiny Bond.
Yeah, Calyrex switches out here, not going to want to get Destiny Bonded, brings that Rillaboom in instead. Indeedee goes for a Protect here, a defensive move from this Indeedee, possibly not going to want to take any damage. Drifloom goes for the Destiny Bond. This is actually, I believe, going to go into that Nihilego slot, so that, or any of the Pokemon there. So Nihilego goes for that Meteor Beam. If this will go into the Drifloom, so if this Nihilego does take out this Drifloom, possibly, it could be really important here to be able to, you know, get this Nihilego off the field. It is probably going to be able to take this down, but now you're not going to have to worry too much for your Ninetales to come in. So now losing this Drifblim, pretty strategic. It gets you that free switch in, and you get it for pretty much free, even though this Nihilego is now off the field and you've lost your Drifblim.
Yeah, and I think there's still maybe 2 turns. Maybe it's 1 turn of Tailwind left. I'm not keeping as much of track of these players as these players would be. But you've got that Xerneas and Ninetales in the back here for Felipe. And the Xerneas here, certainly in Tailwind, would be a really good opportunity to get that Geomancy up. Of course, Calyrex Shadow Rider relies on its special power, or the power of its special type move, should I say, to do damage to Xerneas. And while you've got the Tailwind, that means you can get the Geomancy first. Do you have to do it in front of that Rillaboom? But a combination of Follow Me to redirect the Grassy Glide, in fact, from the Rillaboom would allow that Xerneas pretty much for free to be able to set up that Geomancy. So, yeah, once the Fake Out is removed from play at the end of the turn that we're going into, the Xerneas could have quite a nice time here, but it will all depend on whether or not the Fake Out comes out from Emanuele, where it goes into, and of course, whether or not that Calyrex has Substitute as well, because right now it's looking like Felipe wants to maybe think about playing a little bit passively, because he can't necessarily get that Tailwind, that Geomancy up this turn. But in doing so, does leave the space for the Calyrex not to take any damage this turn and not to be attacked. And if that's the case, a sub here could be absolutely crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And avoiding that fake out pressure is going to be really huge, especially for this one turn, but that does mean that there is one less turn of Tailwind. So Felipe is kind of working against the clock because his Tailwind setter has been knocked out off of the field. So he's going to have to pay attention to possibly the speeds of these Pokemon, especially if that Calyrex is able to get off a lot of damage onto either of these Pokemon. And DD switches out here, though, possibly trying to preserve that Psychic Terrain. Sends in Ninetales. Ninetales will be able to get that Drought up if that is the ability that it has, which it is. So that Drought is now going to make its Fire-type attacks more powerful into this Rillaboom, and it is not going to love... it's going to, be pretty comfortable taking something like a Grassy Glide during this turn. Rillaboom goes for a Fake Out, though. It goes into the protected Xerneas slot. Xerneas not going to be able to do anything. Calyrex has the Substitute, though, so Calyrex is able to set up that free Substitute here and put itself in a great position moving forward.
It is, and what we know that Emanuele doesn't know is that the Ninetales has that Choice Scarf, so we know that it will be able to do lots and lots of damage onto the Calyrex and the Rillaboom. It doesn't matter if Tailwind's on the field or not. That Ninetales is gonna outspeed it, but not wanting to this turn, just switching out into the Indeedee to block any grassy glides coming out from that Rillaboom.
That one is tripping you up today, and I am the same way. Psychic Surge comes out, though, for that Indeedee. Geomancy comes up for the Xerneas, is going to be able to get that up early, get that special defense boost that it's desperately going to need to take on this Calyrex here, even though that Calyrex is still sitting pretty comfortably behind that Substitute. So this Geomancy going to boost this Xerneas' speed, going to boost its special defense, and it's going to boost its special attack. So it is actually able to get the most important move in Xerneas' arsenal up, but that Astral Barrage is going to come out most importantly into this Xerneas slot. Won't affect that Indeedee because it has that special normal typing there. So this Xerneas takes this pretty dang well, should I say, from that Calyrex. Does well less than half of its HP, maybe about a third. Grassy Glide, though, going last in this slot, goes into that Xerneas. The Tailwind finally gone, but Xerneas still has about just under half of its HP here.
It does, and yeah, definitely really crucial that the Xerneas got its Geomancy up before that Grassy Glide came in from the Rillaboom and the Calyrex, but it did do over 50%, and with the combination. So Felipe has got to be really careful here about how he targets it down. Calyrex isn't going to take any damage from the Xerneas, certainly this turn. It could take a little bit of damage from the Rillaboom, but Rillaboom's having to get through an attack, potentially a Moonblast, potentially a Dazzling Gleam here as well, and it's got to do that potentially through the Follow Me coming out from the Indeedee. That Indeedee cannot be knocked out by the Calyrex unless Calyrex decides to go for something like a Psychic or Psyshock, or maybe Expanding Force, but just a helping hand coming out from this Indeedee, and I really want to see if that is enough to knock out this Rillaboom.
Yeah, Dazzling Gleam here is not enough to knock the Rillaboom out. It will take the Substitute out, but this Rillaboom is still going to be able to get a ton of damage off. Calyrex once again goes for that Astral Barrage, and if this Rillaboom goes for another Grassy Glide into the Xerneas slot, that is going to be the end of the Xerneas, who only really gets one turn of Geomancy. Xerneas hanging on with only 22 HP right now. Calyrex showing that it is carrying that Life Orb, and the U-turn here into the Xerneas does not knock it out. It leaves it at 2 HP. Sends that Rillaboom back. That is an absolutely huge turn because that Xerneas now has a whole nother turn to go first.
Yeah, it does. And wow, I mean, Emanuele's got to be kicking himself after that turn. That could be down to different damage rolls that have been on the last 4 attacks. I mean, any 4 of those attacks that did one more damage to the Xerneas, which is definitely possible. Would have been enough to knock it out, but just not quite. Regieleki, though, coming in is quite interesting, and that's definitely going to be a target for Felipe. He's going to need to take that out because, especially if this Regieleki doesn't carry a focus sash and can be knocked out by this Xerneas, which you'd like to think is faster than the Regieleki, but isn't necessarily the case. That the Ninetales in the back holding that Choice Scarf, which is unlikely to be able to outspeed the Regieleki, will be having a great time.
Yeah, Regieleki is faster here, though. It does not hit the Indeedee. You have to hope for a miss, which you get the miss on that Xerneas. Xerneas goes for that dazzling gleam. This is enough to knock out the Calyrex, and no sash on the Regieleki. Felipe is having the luckiest game of his life here right now. This Xerneas is putting in so much work at very little cost.
Yeah, the Pokemon gods are smiling on Felipe right now. Panama wanting to get the win, and Felipe doing everything in his power to ensure that that's going to be the case. Xerneas and indeed likely to protect this turn and just, stall out the last turn. Maybe they just double attack, make things a little bit quicker, but you've still got that Ninetales in the back, so pretty convincing here. In terms of the position for Felipe to win the battle, and Emanuele knows that, he goes for the forfeit. But of course, it was a very, very close game. And, I don't know, looking at this, it's a game of positioning and a game of deciding what Pokemon that you want to both bring to the matchup and as well target into that Drifblim. So, in terms of adjustments, I can't see too many things that Emanuele needs to change. If maybe a couple of damage rolls work in his favor, maybe a couple of other secondary effects happen, maybe everything just those couple of predictions where the Drifblim goes for that Destiny Bond and the Nihilego doesn't go into it that turn, and maybe the Calyrex doesn't go down to it either, you could be in a great position if you're Emanuele. So I feel like it's definitely a case that Felipe probably wants to do a similar thing. He's definitely got a similar game plan. Get the Xerneas set up, get it doing as much as possible, and especially now that that Regieleki isn't carrying a focus sash. And then once that's done, maybe you can get into a similar position than you got into last time. But if Emanuele, say, has the Nihilego available to him, could be, especially in that late game, a completely different game going forwards.
I am sorry, Emanuele, for commentators cursing you all the way to the end of that game. That is really rude of me. Didn't mean it. No hard feelings, but an absolutely crazy game. And we will be going into this game 2 here now. So that's going to show, exactly what these players are going to be bringing. I love the Pokemon that Emanuele brought. I think that Nihilego is so pivotal to deal with that Xerneas, and you just have to make sure, if you get that Tailwind up, if you're Felipe, you have to make sure, as Emanuele's side, that you can get some Electro Webs down and really slow down the Pokemon on his side. And you have to be mindful. This Drifblim may be something that, maybe you can burn or get a secondary effect on so that you don't have to worry about knocking it out, because it does set that really strange position where it's a Pokemon that, it might only have one physical or one attacking move, but you really can't let it go down for free, because then you're going down for free at the same time with a perfectly healthy Pokemon, possibly like that Nihilego was in that last game.
Exactly, and one of the other things that we saw that remember from the first game was that the Regieleki went before that Drifblim, even with the Unburden boost, and so maybe that could be a route for Emanuele. Just go for the same lead that he did last time, Calyrex and the Regieleki. Go for an Electro Web. And to be honest, with the natural speed of Drifblim being fairly middling actually overall, it could be that the combination of Electro Web dropping the speed by one stage would be enough for the Calyrex to then outspeed it again. You could get a KO for free right off the bat, and so maybe without the Drifblim on the field or without that Tailwind going up, you just end up on trying to get into a position where you've got Calyrex and the Nihilego, and you're just clicking the attack button, and really going to be difficult for Felipe to deal with that if that's the case, and that's the adjustment that Emanuele wants to go for.
Yeah, leads here for game two, though. Calyrex Regieleki, like you said, exact same lead from that game one here. Felipe, though, his lead, we're going to have to see exactly what it is. It's the Indeedee and Drifloon. So the exact same turn one scenario that we had. We'll still see that Psychic Surge. We will still see that Psychic Seed and that Unburden come out. But again, you have to be pretty careful. Now that you know your speed tier for that Regieleki and you know you're going faster, your options are a little bit more open.
They are, and you've got to assume that because of that speed interaction, that the Regieleki is holding a choice scarf, and that's a double-edged sword here because you know that it could potentially go for the Electro Web first, and that puts you in a difficult position. But equally, your opponent knows that, or sorry, Felipe knows that the expanding force could go off and maybe even pick up a KO on that Regieleki.
Yeah, Ninetales actually switches in here, though, again, setting that drought, setting that sun up, and that's going to send that Indeedee off of the field. So Ninetales coming out a little bit earlier, possibly to take some of this damage. Regieleki goes for the Electro Web. Once again, it does slow down both of the Pokemon on this side. They both take a pretty decent chunk of damage from a low-powered move, lowering the speed of both of them. So even if this Tailwind comes up, it will only be a +1 stage of speed. Astral Barrage, though, from this Calyrex into both of these Pokemon here, that is enough to knock out both of them. That is a huge turn one from Emanuele with that powerful Astral Barrage right off the bat. No more Destiny Bond to worry about, and then no more shenanigans from that Choice Scarf, Ninetales, and a really important Grim Neigh boost to boot.
Yeah, two of them, in fact, and the only thing that I think Felipe's Pokemon are going to be saying next turn is "ow." To be honest, because that Calyrex is going to be hitting like a truck, and Xerneas Indeedee coming in is going to be very difficult for Felipe to do anything to maneuver. The Electro Web can come out from the Regieleki, that's going to do sort of minimal damage, and really the only target here is the Xerneas, because if that Indeedee, as we've seen, Emanuele doesn't know this yet, but the Indeedee does only carry expanding force, and that's going to be not going to be very effective against Calyrex. Yeah, maybe it knocks out Regieleki, but at this point, I don't really care about that. It's just the Calyrex that needs to launch out its powerful moves. But Regieleki going to be playing a little bit on the defensive, and Rillaboom switching in its place.
Yeah, who needs double target expanding force when you have Rillaboom in the back to make it only a single target? Instead, the follow me here, even though it is looking down two Pokemon with double targeting moves, the Astral Barrage from this Calyrex won't affect the Indeedee, of course, because of that normal typing, but we saw how much damage it did with that two special defense boost. It does so much, a full one-hit knockout here without that Geomancy. So that Geomancy is so important. This was a very quick game from Emanuele. There is absolutely nothing Felipe can do here unless for some reason miraculously Psychic Terrain comes back and he gets multiple expanding force critical hits. But insane game plan from Emanuele.
Yeah, I mean it really changes the way that this game plays out, right? I mean, everything that Felipe's team banks on is that there isn't going to be anything faster than that Drifblim in Tailwind, or sorry, with the Unburden boost, should I say, so it can set up the Tailwind. And when you have a Pokemon like Scarf Regieleki in front of you, that's really difficult because now all of a sudden you don't have your speed control. Then you've got, in this particular matchup, a Calyrex Shadow Rider that can do so much damage to it. It doesn't even matter if the Indeedee takes damage or not, because it doesn't. The Regieleki may get knocked out, it may not. If you're playing Scarf Regieleki, you probably have some investment there to spare to put a little bit into bulk. So maybe expanding force not even enough to pick up a knockout on that, and certainly not on the Calyrex. And so you get into this position where kind of it's almost like, what do you do? Because once those two Grim Neigh boosts came out, we saw it knock out the Xerneas, and you need a lot of bulk to be able to survive that. Even if you do survive it, Scarf Regieleki could potentially outspeed that again, and Electro Web, and then Astral Barrage again. So you get into this sort of position where you just get locked down completely, and it's really hard to do anything to change that up.
Yeah, that is one of those games where Felipe wasn't able to get any damage off onto Emanuele's side. So it's another thing that he had to pay attention to is he had such a strong and commanding presence in game one that was completely mitigated by taking out that Drifblim, and that Ninetales swapped in basically for nothing. It wasn't able to do anything that it wanted to possibly against the Rillaboom that was in the back. So you're taking these big hits, if you let, you're gonna have to make some adjustments just depending on exactly what your game plan is here. What Pokemon might stay behind? Do you even bring Drifloom, or do you try and go for a faster thing like Ninetales Venusaur, where you can take an attack from that Regieleki, and then if you're carrying something like Sleep Powder, you can get a Sleep Powder off and get some of your enemies to sleep here, and that could be really nice moving forward. So, Felipe is going to have to pay a little bit more attention, I think, now that he knows especially that Astral Barrage Electro Web combo is enough to knock out his Pokemon, that he has to lead a little bit differently here, maybe go for something a little bit bulkier. Especially, maybe just find ways to mitigate that damage without, maybe, you can't fake out a Calyrex here. And that Regieleki is still one of the fastest gate Pokemon in the game. With Choice Scarf, I don't think anything can outspeed it, even with maybe 2 Tailwinds. So, I mean, that's not true, actually, but it is one of those Pokemon that is just completely terrifying to deal with.
Yeah, so difficult, especially when it's just sitting there electro-webbing and there's nothing like a Rillaboom. I mean, that would be the adaptation to something like Scarf Regieleki. You play Rillaboom, that really doesn't take too much damage, and then maybe you've got knockoff available if you're really scared of Calyrex, or you just got Grassy Glide to be able to just knock it out. That one came out really smoothly, actually. I'm very proud of myself on that. So here we go, anyway, into the third game here. No switch-ups here from Emanuele, and coming out with that Regieleki and Calyrex, but an adjustment here with the Venusaur coming out right off the bat.
Yeah, Venusaur and Indeedee instead for Felipe. So interesting choice here. Also, we saw a peek behind the screen. This Venusaur is holding a berry, and with that Unnerve on the field, it's not going to be able to eat it if it needs to. But most importantly here, you've still got this Psychic Terrain. So you can go for something like that Expanding Force or that Follow Me, even though both of these moves are double target. But if this Venusaur can put somebody to sleep, it's going to make a lot more of a better position for Felipe, and it will slow this game down a whole lot more for whatever he's trying to do in this game one.
Definitely, and one of the things that you've got to be wary of is that Ninetales coming in from the back, but doesn't come in this turn. Just Follow Me coming out from the Indeedee, and it is going to be the Electro Web coming out from the Regieleki on Emanuele's side of the field. We'll have to see the Expanding Force is enough to pick it out. The Astral Barrage, in fact, is enough to pick up the KO on this Venusaur. Looks to me like it could be trained to be a little bit more bulky than the more offensive Venusaur variant, so definitely could take this. And yeah, it does on 16 health and just manages to survive. And yeah, that's a really big sleep powder going into that Regieleki there.
A great sleep powder for good measure. Not going to take an Electro Web either at the start of its next turn. But most importantly, you know that this Calyrex is faster than you and you have very little HP left. So you might have to be a little bit more defensive with this Venusaur, especially if that is a lot of your game plan going into the next round. But most importantly, you're stopping that low speed. And if you get in your Ninetales, you could be faster and then get that Calyrex to sleep.
Exactly, and that, then it comes down to whether or not Emanuele predicts the Ninetales to come in here. You got to expect that it would be the case, but one of the best answers for that Ninetales is the Nihilego that's almost certainly in the back for Emanuele, and getting that in front of an Indeedee and certainly potentially another Sleep Powder is quite difficult. So you've really got to read this turn well, and we'll see if Emanuele's managed to do that this turn.
Yeah, Rillaboom swaps out here, though, for that Regieleki, who is going to stay asleep in the back for Emanuele. Grassy Surge comes out here, again, stopping that Expanding Force from being to target and getting that priority, and being one less Pokemon that you can Sleep Powder. Calyrex goes for the Astral Barrage, though. This will be enough to pick up that Venusaur, and we saw that peek behind the screen once again that there is no Ninetales from Felipe this game. So this Venusaur came in, it just put that Regieleki to sleep, and that's kind of all it was able to do here. And Calyrex now gets a really important Grim Neigh boost. We saw how strong that it was in that last game too, able to get those Pokemon out of the way. And Expanding Force here from this Indeedee into that Calyrex slot does so little damage. Felipe in a little bit of a tougher spot now because he wasn't able to gain any speed control.
No, and one of the difficult things in this position, especially now that Emanuele's got his Grim Neigh boost, is that you kind of want to have Psychic Terrain on the field. We saw behind the screen that Felipe has that Drifloom in the back, and so you can't switch it in here and then pivot out to get Psychic Terrain back quickly enough to bring that Drifloom in, because at this point you're just going to have a Grassy Glide and an Expanding Force, an Astral Barrage, in fact, coming out from the Calyrex, and we saw how much damage that was doing. The Indeedee doesn't do any damage in return because that Rillaboom is on the field and changed the terrain to grassy. So yeah, it's really looking quite difficult for Felipe, and that just see how much that Scarf Regieleki changes the dynamic of the game, because you look back at game one and it was a completely different matchup when Emanuele didn't just click Electro Web turn one, and being able to do that has just shut down pretty much every option that Felipe has in his arsenal.
Yeah, Rillaboom goes for the fake out here, though, into that Xerneas. Won't be able to get a Geomancy up as that Drifloon switched in for that Indeedee, and the Calyrex gets another substitute up. We saw exactly how important this was in that last game. So now this Regieleki, so now that the Xerneas is on the field, it didn't get that really nice, freer Geomancy slot when that Calyrex didn't make a move. But now Calyrex is in a great position to move forward, even if this Drifloom's on the field, and it doesn't have its Unburden yet.
No, and I think this is a little bit tricky now for Emanuele, because we get into that Tailwind and Destiny Bond and all the rest of it, because the Indeedee can now switch in and change the terrain. No risk from the Calyrex from that Astral Barrage. And so, yeah, I think, if Emanuele had just hit the attack button that turn, he would have definitely been in a great spot, knocked out the Drifblim as quickly as it came in, Grassy Glide into the Xerneas for good measure, just to make sure you're picking up the KO. And there's really not a lot you can do about that if you're Felipe. So Emanuele playing a little bit more defensively than maybe he needed to, but indeed hitting the field now, setting up that Psychic terrain.
Yeah, Psychic Surge comes out. Importantly, going to get this Psychic Seed boost and that Unburden boost for that speed here for this Drifloom. And now Drifloom could possibly go for something. Now that Regieleki isn't on the field, it can go for this Tailwind right now, and then next turn you've possibly got a chance to go for a Destiny Bond for either of these Pokemon. Calyrex goes for the Astral Barrage, will hit this Drifloom though, and that is going to do a ton of damage like we saw in that last game. And so if the only thing this does is get that Xerneas on the field faster, that's still a nice win here, but most importantly, you get that second boost of that Grimnay, and we saw that that was enough to knock out that Xerneas with those +2 Grimnay boosts. So I think Felipe is still on the back foot in a way that isn't great, because this Calyrex is not going to get stopped next turn. Rillaboom goes for the U-turn into this Indeedee, does so much damage still, even without that critical hit like we saw, still gets down to under a half of its HP. And then Emanuele's going to switch in one last Pokemon here. Could either be that Regieleki or something else that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, Nihilego coming in here. Could be the Regieleki. It doesn't really matter at this point. Emanuele is definitely in the driver's seat. He's got the 2 Grimnay boost. We saw that knock out the Xerneas in the last game, as you mentioned before, Maeve. And so really, Emanuele just has to hit all of his attacks, and none of his attacks have any chance of missing. And certainly not the ones that he'd be looking to use in this position. So yeah, it's a real uphill battle for Felipe. Even with the Tailwind up, the Xerneas may be able to equalize the special defense with the going for a Geomancy first, but even so, it's probably not going to be enough with the amount of damage you're going to have to take in return.
Yeah, and Rillaboom comes in here. Most importantly, this is once again changing the terrain. So now any double target moves that this Indeedee could have pulled off with that Expanding Force are not going to matter, and this Indeedee is going to be a little bit nullified from that. Xerneas goes for the Protect here, possibly not wanting to take any damage that it knows will knock it out. Indeedee also going for Protect here as well. So even though he got that Tailwind up in that last turn, he's still not able to use it this turn, as that Astral Barrage comes into both of the protected Pokemon. So now Felipe's in a really tough spot, because he still has to deal with this Calyrex, and that Nihilego didn't burn that Meteor Beam like Felipe may have wanted.
No, and yeah, there's a bit of a toss up there whether bringing the Rillaboom in at that point would be the right decision. Maybe the Geomancy going up and some grassy terrain recovery would have put the Xerneas in a place where it could survive a couple of attacks. And you've always got to work around that Indeedee, but now with the Xerneas just protecting, it's free to take a Fake Out and an Astral Barrage here from Emanuele's side of the field, and definitely lock up this game for Team Italy, and of course the win in the match as well, so taking his team to 5 wins total so far.
Yeah, and this has been a really nice showcase from Felipe of these Pokemon that we haven't seen yet. Ninetales a really interesting pick. I haven't seen Ninetales really ever, because I started a little bit after you did, Ben. But of course, this Expanding Force, this is that last kind of ditch move here for this Indeedee. Rillaboom can still go for some Grassy Glides. This is going to wrap this game up. Emanuele still showed a really nice job here with that Choice Scarf variant on that Regieleki, where even though it was only firing off Electro Webs pretty much every single time, it was still doing a ton of damage, and it was still making this game tough for Felipe, who even though he had that great game one with that really nice destiny bond to that Nihiligo, made it a little bit tougher because then, you had to pay attention to making sure that that Regieleki gets off the field. And even though you put it to sleep, that wasn't enough to really handle it because you lost that Venusaur early on, which is a great source of attack power when you're going into that game three. So maybe it would have been nice to see that Ninetales there just to get that extra speed and to just start putting Pokemon to sleep. But a still really nice game three from both players. Really nice to see Emanuele go for a lot of really strong special attacking Pokemon on his side, that Astral Barrage and then even that Electro Web as well.
Definitely. And I want to give a real shout out to Felipe here. I mean, what we're seeing is the innovation that can come from these sort of tournaments and showcasing so many players. It's really good to see. And of course, you've always got that toss up. You use the best Pokemon in the format, and the likelihood is that you don't run into too many matchups where you just lose straight off the bat. When you use a little bit more outside choices, you can have those matches, and that's what we saw with Scarf Regieleki. But you have to make that choice at some point because team building isn't just about how to make your team as strong against everything as you can. It's of course trying to decide on where the weak points are and what you're comfortable to try and play around. And Scarf Regieleki, it's not too common. It gets seen occasionally if there is a Regieleki on the team that you're facing up against, which is fairly common potentially. You're not likely to see it with a choice scarf. So I do actually like the choice that Felipe made to really tech his team against everything but that outside sort of choice. And it's just unfortunate that came in combination with a Calyrex Shadow Rider that was quite difficult for him to deal with, rather than where you would normally see it, which is a Zacian, and you have other options to it on the team. So yeah, I do really big shout out to Felipe here. And of course, well played to Emanuele, understanding the matchup after game one and then being able to just be so dominating and figure out his win cons straight away. But I think that will be it for the moment for the second match today. We'll be back very shortly with some more matches, and we are going to be facing up against Peru and France this time.